Hey guys, this is Lucid. I've got another Dominions intervention for you. We're going to be looking at Late Age Pan. And this will be kind of fun. It's a little different. This player's in a very good position, and I think they're going to win the game. So in this one, we're going to be talking about kind of how to fine-tune it, how to maybe... I'm just going to be adding some ideas in to what he's already doing, because he's certainly in a great position. So, and then how to maybe ensure that he gets the win. So this will be different than some of the other videos where maybe they're in a tighter spot when they give it to me to look at. But I think it'll still be fun. Pan is a pretty cool nation. Late Age Pan's pretty cool. A little bit too, real quick about these intervention videos. If you want one, I kind of have a lot of people ask. So usually it's just... it takes me about 5 hours to make one of these because I end up usually recording it twice because I never like the first time, and then I have to think about it for a few hours to really figure out what I'm gonna add. So I normally ask for like $30 through Patreon, but occasionally I kind of just haven't done one in a while and I feel like doing one, and that's what this is. So this was just any one of my Patreon subscribers. I had them if they were in a cool game. And they wanted me to do it, then I just kind of picked one at random who had a nation they wanted me to look at, and that's how we ended up with Late Age Pan. So anyway, that's kind of how this works. So let's get into it. This is my second recording because I went and deleted the first one. So first we're going to talk about the nation. And I'm going to give you a quick overview. This isn't going to be like a full national overview. Pan is kind of... Late Age Pan is a more heavily armored version of Early Age Pan. They have like the normal Harpies, but they actually have like these badass Harpies, the Strimphalian birds, who basically have an additional attack. This one actually is Area of Effect 1, so it's always going to hit. And it's length 5, which means it's not going to get repelled. And it's only used once, so it's kind of for like an alpha strike. But still, a piercing 8 damage, always hit AoE 1 is pretty good. Pretty good. I haven't really used these guys in like expansion or rating, but I expect that 20 or 30 of these guys could pop enemy PD pretty reliably. And like these guys, the slashing, 8 slashing damage sucks. But this is much better. But these guys are not stealthy, so that's the trade-off. They have a bunch of satyrs. They have the sneaky kind. These actually are kind of cool. They generate unrest, which is pretty good when you're raiding. It's actually really good when you're raiding. If you're not, especially if you're in like a, you know it's going to be a hard war. This is really good. Then you have these guys who basically have javelins, which is nice, and then you have these guys with just the spear. They have furs and a buckler. This guy only has furs but no buckler. So if you... Probably this one or this one are going to be better for raiding. Maybe a combination of those two. Some javelin throwers, some front line. But this is kind of like normal Pan stuff right here. What's cool about Late Age is they have really heavily armored dudes. So Early Age is like furs, Middle Age is bronze, and then Late Age is like plate mail. So like these guys, they have a plate cuirass, and they have a hoplite helmet, they have 16 protection, they have a hoof for melee, which actually sucks. Like a lot of human troops have better melee, but they have better kind of base stats, and they're also really high precision. So this is a 14 precision crossbow, which is really good. And then the high base HP means, and the high protection means they're going to take trades with archers pretty damn well. But yeah, and then they just have a good crossbow. They're also a little higher strength. I don't know if this might actually result in 1 higher damage. I'm not quite sure on the cutoffs here, but anyway, just basically having a high precision, high protection, reasonably cheap crossbow is a good thing. They've got the Satyr Hoplite, which is pretty sick just because he's got Formation Fighter. This player is using a lot of these 2 units, which I like. These guys don't have a ton of attack density just because this is not a terribly high damage attack. They do repel though, which is nice. Yeah. And they're formation fighter, which means you can pack more of them a square, so it's not horrible, but it's not great. But they have shields. And that means high protection plus a shield. They're going to do pretty well against archer fire. So, yeah. Then they have a Dryad Hoplite, which basically is like a satyr, but with awe. But they don't have quite as good armor. They're okay. If you take a bless, they're fine to use, but this is really your only sacred unit. You then have Centaur Crossbowmen, who have a little better precision, but they're way more expensive. So if you really want archers, they're not really what you want to use. You probably don't want to use these for archers, but I mean they're pretty well armored, but they're much better than the satyrs in combat. So but the thing with crossbows is they never run out of ammo. So it's really only if you're expecting to get flanked, you could use these guys, or you could do like a big box of satyrs in the middle, and then have these guys on the flanks of the satyrs, so that if units trickle around the side, they'll run into your centaurs, who will use a sword and a hoof, which will be much better than just the hoof of the satyrs. These guys don't have hats though, which is a little bit of a problem if they get hit in the head. So not as good at trading. Whoops. Not as good at trading with archer fire, whereas like these guys have hats, but they don't have shields. And these guys actually do have a little shield. So I'm not actually sure how that would come out. I feel like, especially if you get any protection buff on these guys, well, if you get a protection buff, these guys are going to have a shield, and then the hat won't matter as much. I feel like with a protection buff, these guys are going to do better trading with with archers because of the shield. Without a protection buff, these guys might be a little better. But I'm not totally sure, because you end up getting hit in the head a fair amount with archer fire. So anyway, I'm not sure about that. But these guys are definitely better in melee. And then we've got the Centaur Cataphract, which are pretty badass. They don't have super high defense, but they have really high protection. Yeah, it's just crazy. So they're not super killy. They've got, they'll have decent attack density. You got 4 attacks per square, but they're not going to kill super hard things to kill. Like they've got the charge bonus, which is nice. And this is piercing, so they'll be doing some damage to pretty high protection units, but not a ton. Not a ton. And their stats aren't awesome. They're kind of okay. But these would be like great for indies. Anyway, those are pretty cool. And then they've got Minotaurs. They've got the Minotaur Soldier, who hits for just a shit ton of damage. So one of the things you'll notice about the early part of the lineup is these guys are, nobody here is very killy. They don't have magic weapons. They don't have very terribly high attack density, and they don't hit for too much damage. And also nobody here was Berserk. So we have no Berserkers, whereas like earlier pans, you'll have more Berserk options. These guys are not Berserkers either, but they hit for 29 damage, which is a shit ton. And if you buff up their strength, because this is a two-handed weapon, it will be even more. They've got really good protection. So these are, if you've got really big, nasty guys running at you, you probably want to use them. And then you've got these guys who are the Grove Guard, who are a little bit more, they're not sacred. They're 10 more gold than the Minotaur Soldier, but they go Berserk. So once they go Berserk, they hit for even more damage. And I think they have a little better protection. Yeah, these guys are 19 protection versus 17. And they trample too. So pretty solid. For the commanders, we have the Black Harpy, which is a great scout, and can lead small groups of probably your Strimphalian birds or your Harpies, depending on what you're doing. You have the Satyr Commander, 40 leadership, and this is the last of our sneaking units, aside from like some of our mages. But it's our sneaking commander. So you would use this guy. Actually, he's useful as a thug, and we'll talk about how to do that. But yeah, so we've got the Satyr Commander. He can leadership of 40. We've got the Minotaur Commander, who actually potentially can thug as well. I think we actually have, because of also our mage lineup, we actually have all 3 of these guys are different but interesting fluffed thug. Like if you fluff them, they thug. And we actually have very cheap fluffing options. So I think that's one way, and that's kind of going to be one of the things I'm going to suggest as we look at kind of what Pan can do that he's not already doing, because he's already doing a lot of good stuff. But these guys can be fluffed thugs. Yeah, you can put a few cheap items on them, and they're going to be awesome. Their size 3 is trampling, which isn't great. They have very high encumbrance, which is kind of a problem. But yeah. We'll talk about kind of ways to mitigate that. Here we've got the Cataphract Commander. And this guy has 80 leadership, so this allows you to use important formations and stuff. So this is probably the main commander. Your main kind of army commander, though you also have 80 leadership on your Pan, which we'll get to in a minute. But these guys also, they've got pretty good defense, very good protection. So if you throw like a frost brand on them and then you give them any kind of defensive fluffing, these guys are actually very cost efficient PD raiders. They're not terribly expensive, 85 gold. And then finally, we have the Keeper of Tradition. If you have a good Bless, which there's not a strong reason, I don't think, to take a terribly great Bless as Pan, or as Late Age Pan, you can use these guys as thugs as well. They go Berserk, which is nice. So that is one reason to potentially, if you're going to be using thugs, to pay more than this guy, just for the Berserk, because the Berserk is actually really nice. It is going to kind of hit your fatigue a little harder, which is one of the problems these guys have, because they have really high encumbrance, and then high encumbrance coupled with trample ends up kind of being a problem. But anyway, and then they're a priest. But then we have the Centaur Sages. These guys are awesome. They have really high research. They're really cheap. And yeah, every single one of them can join a communion, and then they're going to each bring different paths. You have air, which are really good for some of your key buffs, and then also for evocation spam. You have water, which is probably one of the least useful, but anyway, you can do all the water buffs and frozen heart spam and stuff like that. You have earth, which is probably the best of the thug pass, but you can also put earth power in your communion, and then you have nature, and you can do the big earth buffs, Army of Gold, etc., and then you have nature, which can do like personal regen to your communion, and then elemental fortitude to your communion, but then it can also do all of the big nature buffs. So anyway, these guys are sick, and he's got a ton of them, so we'll see. We'll kind of talk about them. And then we have the Dryad. All the different Pans have different Dryads, and Late Age Pan has the cheapest Dryad, but in some ways kind of the least flexible. You don't really get any cross paths, so you can't, a Nature 1 mage isn't great. I mean, I like Nature 1 mages, but, they have a very small set of things they can do. Whereas, like, if you have the Nature Water cross path, you can do Foul Vapors and other stuff. Different kinds of buffing. These guys, they're kind of all the same. But they're stealthy. So they can run with, you can pair them up with Satyr Commanders, and you can put 3 Satyr Commanders in a square. You can bring these guys with them, and we'll talk about this later, but basically you can fluff them, and they're stealthy, so they're hard to catch. They can also do Swarm, and then they can Seduce, which is really important if you think you're getting attacked. And then we have the Pan as the final guy. These guys do not attract Meneids, but they're also kind of cheap. They're Earth Nature crosspath, which is a great crosspath because you can do Strength of Gaia, which gives you +1 Nature, which means every single one of these can get up to Nature 4, which actually is really critical for a spell we don't have researched, which is Charm, which is really nice. But then also, of course, there's a bunch of great nature buffs you can do. And then they can also get up to Earth 3, all of them. And then if you put Boots on them, they can get up to Earth 4. And then if you put Bloodstone on them, they get up to Earth 5. And that unlocks some very special things. So, anyway, quick overview again. It's a heavily armored Pan. They still have some stealthy options, but not as many. They can do Communions, which is a new thing for Pan. And then they have quite a few different kind of Thug Commander chassis that they can use. So, yeah. That is it. Now we're going to go through the Diplo Landscape, and that's actually one of the best things that this player, Sertoma, has going for him. Basically, Pan and Marignon, Satis and Marignon are newly entered into a war, and like there was a big battle There's going to be some, was there a big battle? Yeah, okay, so there was a reasonably sized battle here. Which we'll kind of just watch. This is apparently a skelly spam business going on here. We have Satis's god. They've got flame spirits moving in. And you can see just an extraordinary amount of skeletons being generated. And I think we know how this is going to go. So there's a few super combatants here. We've got a fallen angel, and we've got a Poseidon. Both of these are going to be pretty hard to kill. He's regeneration 15, so that's going to be a lot of HP regen a turn. And then they've got Soul Vortex here. No regeneration though, but also Phoenix Pyre. Now this guy can hit them and just destroy their soul, so we'll see what happens. We do have some drain life coming out, which basically means they're probably going to die. But I don't know if they're going to be... It doesn't look like they're going to be able to kill him fast enough. Oh, but the god jumps in. Was this guy flying? Yeah, okay. Yeah, he's flying. Yeah. Okay, so the god just destroys them. There went Poseidon. What a cool chassis. I like this guy. I don't know if I would actually get him in a Satis game, but god, what a badass. So cool. And just destroy your soul. Soul death. I think this gives you the Soul Slay debuff where you don't respawn if you're immortal too. I don't know if they got the... There's a bunch of skeletons I gotta scroll through. I was trying to find the fallen angel. Maybe it oh, was that it? Okay, here it is. Yeah, okay, so Poseidon's dead. The fallen angel, I guess, is still here somewhere. Oh, here it is. Yeah, it just gets basically murdered. Okay, and now it's retreated. It got killed a few times and then ran, which is kind of one of the things Phoenix Pyre ends up being useful for, especially on flyers. But they usually die a few times and then they'll run, unless they're berserked. So anyway, Satis won, did not lose much. Marignon, I think Satis is actually... Well, no, they're pretty big. So it's not... These are both pretty big players. Nobody seems terribly huge. I think Pan actually may be... If not the biggest, they're right up there. The other war that is raging is between Mictlan and Abyssia. And like, here's a big battle between them. And so Mictlan has a ton of sacreds, which is, you know, not surprising. The bless that they have on them is attack, decay weapons, which meh, pretty meh about, shock resistance, poison resistance, defense +5, strength +4, blood surge. So they're pretty killy. They have very high defense, but against things like fire elementals and then Abyssian evocations, defense doesn't really matter, and that a lot of the bless is going into defense. And the formation here is kind of garbage, just because like these guys are all getting clumped up where they're gonna get nailed by falling fires, which is just murdering them. Whereas like there's nobody on this flank. So potentially sending them in waves, like having one group on attack rear, attack rear, attack rear, and then a second wave behind it on a hold and attack rear, would space it out so they don't get quite as jammed up. But I'm not sure if that would have made them win here. So anyway, Abyssia doing some good stuff. But this is kind of what you want. Super high attrition on both sides. Or pretty high attrition. Like Abyssia, who won, still took a huge amount of losses. And like most of their troops died. And we're not going to go watch the whole battle, because that's not really the point of this. But so all your neighbors are basically in a war. I'm not sure who Atlantis is fighting, if anyone. And then your other neighbor, Tianchi, is fighting Agartha, but this player has just declared war on Tianchi. And yeah. So we are going to basically be eating Tianchi before he finishes eating Agartha. And I'm pretty sure this is going to be a good war for Pan. Okay, so we've talked about the diplomatic landscape. I'm going to go through what research is done real quick. Okay, so first we're at turn 56. So, and the research has been humming along. This guy's at 3,400, which is phenomenal for this point in the game. They're just crushing research. I bet they're first in research right now. So we've got Alt 9 done, Conjuration 8. They're working on Enchantment 9. I would suggest after this getting Thom 7 for Charm, which is going to be pretty good versus super combatants and the like. And then, yeah, I'm not sure what after that. But honestly, it doesn't really matter. I think my main advice after this is like, look, you're already to the point where you've gotten like 90% of the value once you hit Enchantment 9 and Thom 7 that you're going to get out of research. So, yeah, you can start using those mages to not research. And like, I think you don't need to recruit sages anymore. You've already got enough sages from your research group, and you can turn them into military. Like, they're very good fighting, so they're not, it's not like, don't get sages. But you already have a lot. And we'll talk more about that, like what you need to recruit. But now that we've talked a little bit about what research you have, I kind of asked Toma what was his army. And he said the group coming into this fort was kind of the first, you know, because I'm trying to give some feedback on like what we could do to make the army better. And to do that, I kind of need to see what he's planning on rolling with. So he said this was kind of the closest. He's grouping up the army. He has some of the scripting done from other stuff it's done. But this is kind of the closest thing to a, you know, scripted army he has on the board right now. So he's got about 125 of these crossbowmen. And then he's got, I think, about almost 200 of the heavy, or about 150 of the Satyr hoplites. And then he's got a bunch of raiders, which are coming in, like the stealthy guys, which presumably are going to roll out. So anyway, that's kind of the first army. There's a few things we can note about what he's doing, and I really like this. I mean, it's a little expensive, but it's cool. He's basically doing a turbo communion with Centaur Sages, and a turbo communion just means that instead of relying on your communion slaves to kind of be fatigued neutral, like where you try to give them enough reinvigoration so they don't fatigue out and then take HP damage and die. A turbo communion, you're more relying on the fact they can regen enough so that as they take HP damage, they'll regen it. One of the reasons they're good for it is they have recuperation, so if they get afflictions, which tends to happen in turbo communions, they will get rid of them. So what he has done is two things. He's put a coral sword to give them more HP, which bumps them up to 4 HP a turn instead of 3 from regen, and then he put a regen ring on them, so they're at 10% regen. Once they get personal regen distributed to them through the communion, they'll be at 20%, which means they should be at 8 regen a second, which is actually very good for turbo communioning. So that's pretty cool. He's got 4 or 5 of them, and then a few communion masters. And we'll look at the spells he's going to cast, just what he has scripted already. It's very possible he was going to script more stuff. He's got a Fairy Queen coming in to drop Fog Warriors, and the Fairy Queen is Air 4. Now, this also is something that's very easy for him to do with a normal communion. Like, with 4 communion slaves, you're getting +2 nature. +2 to all your paths. And then if your air guy drops Power of the Spheres, it's very easy to do this without having to worry about the helmet. The risk is that you're not going to be getting it off super early. So if you're worried about somebody dropping Earthquake or something like that, sometimes you want to do like Fog Warriors turn 1 or Mass Flight turn 1. Those are kind of the downsides of putting Fog Warriors and Mass Flight on the communion side of things. So anyway, we have turn 1 Fog Warriors, which is nice. But this is expensive because we're doing it with the Winged Helmet. So you could do it with just your communion, though, you know, it's going to be a fair amount of fatigue for everybody, but I don't think you would really need to worry about it with your slave setup like you have it. But I haven't tested that, so it could be that you've tested it and you know better here. But generally, I probably wouldn't waste gems on the Winged Helmets. Next, we have Aerofin coming out, which is really good because your Satyr Hoplites who have shields and then good protection, and then especially once we put a protection buff, with Aerofin on them, they're going to be just completely immune to crossbow fire. Because they're going to be super high protection with a shield, with Fog Warriors, and with Aerofin. They're just going to be completely immune. So that's cool. And then coming down here, he's doing Mass Flight. Now, let's talk about Mass Flight, because I think oftentimes Mass Flight can be a mistake. There's a few things that I think in this case are probably going to mean it's a mistake. One of the things that you want when you cast Mass Flight is you want to have the numbers advantage. The reason is because as your troops, like, let's say they're back here and they fly on top of the enemy, and the enemy's, let's say they're not in like a perfect box or a perfect line formation, they're like, you know, as they're walking forward, they're a little bit staggered. Your guys are going to intermix with their guys. Now, if you have the numbers advantage, as they intermix, you will in general kind of tend to surround them. So you might be doing 6 attacks a turn, whereas they're only doing like 1 or 2. And that's going to make you win. If they're all in really tight box formations where you don't get a big numbers advantage, like you just surround the box, then it's kind of like, you know, it's not as important. Your numbers advantage won't mean much. And like that's one of the things too, like when you have 2 enemies with line formations, like 1 line here, 1 line here, and as they smash into each other, not counting missile units, it doesn't matter that much how many units you have. It more matters the quality of your line. Because you're basically, you have very limited surface area, and so having a ton of numbers isn't going to matter much. So like you could have this whole thing full of people back here, but if the enemy has just like, you know, 100 really thick guys, but you have 1,000, his 100 thick guys are just going to continue crushing through, you know, each line that you continue to bring up. Where that can no longer be the case is once you do Mass Flight, you'll start getting much more surrounds, you get more harass, and the numbers count for a lot more. The other time you don't want to do Mass Flight is when you have the ranged advantage. So when you are shooting more, or your shots are mattering for more than theirs. So like if you're doing Fog Warriors, if you're doing Army of Gold or Lead, which you're all 9, so you should be. It's not scripted here, but you're bringing in somebody who could have, so I assume you were planning on it. Like if you're doing all those things, you're going to be like immune to archer fire, basically. Aerofin, all that. But your opponent may not, so you want to kind of drag the battle out, and you don't, especially when you don't have that many frontline troops, like you only have, you know, 150 of your hoplites, you may not want, you probably don't want to get your melee troops all mixed up where they could potentially get hit and killed. Rather, just kind of form a defensive line and let your archers kind of pound into them. So anyway, that is that. So I think the Mass Flight is very situational, can be very good. Also, when you're storming forts, Mass Flight's really good, and it kind of outweighs the other negatives almost all the time. I mean, not almost all the time, but a lot of times when you're storming forts, Mass Flight's good. So anyway, just a thought there. Don't feel like you need to use Mass Flight just because you have it. It's good in particular situations. Sometimes doing Mass Flight can be a help for your enemy. Personal regen going on. This guy's basically just buffing up the communion slaves. And then this guy's doing anti-magic and then earth power. Earth power is also going to buff up the communion slaves. And then down here we have Will of Fates going off. And Will of Fates is really nice when you have a lot of kind of troops that are not undead. It's going to give everybody luck. So this is really good to add. And he had this guy doing Power of Spheres. And then he had this guy who was an additional communion slave. And I like that. If you bringing the exact number of communion slaves, I think is often a problem. I don't know if he was going to do Coral Sword on this guy too. But the thing you want to think about is if you have a Turbo Communion, which functions primarily off of use of gear, like a Coral Blade plus a Ring of Regen. If you have 4, it's risky because one of them can die and now your Communion kind of sucks. So if you bring 5, this 5th guy is going to die if you don't put the same kind of gear on him that everybody else has. So bringing a 5th with gear, probably a good idea. Alternatively, you don't really need, like this is nice to have, and you're going to get kind of twice the bang for your buck from having Ring of Regen. But it's a pretty expensive item. Like, this is going to go from, because like you can get personal regen from just your communion. So it's really the difference between 10 and 20% regen. So if you have no Coral Sword, you're at 3 HP regen a month, because that's a 10% rounded up of 23. If you add the Coral Sword, you're going to be at 4 regen a month, so it's like 25% more. And then if you add the Ring of Regeneration, let's say you didn't do the Coral Sword, you'd be going from 3 to 6. So, but this is a 8 gem item with the hammer, and this is a 3 gem item with the hammer. So it also matters, like, do you have excess earth? I mean, do you have excess water? Do you have excess nature? But this is kind of an expensive item to be putting on communion slaves, but this is totally practical. So, and you could probably get by, like, it may be better to have like 8 of these guys with the Coral Blade, with just personal regen, rather than, because ultimately the number of like communions you're going to be fielding is probably going to be limited by the number of nature gems to crank out Rings of Regeneration, because you're going to have other things you want to do with nature gems too. So just Coral Sword, if you have it, and then personal regen is going to be enough, especially if you have like 8 communion slaves, because you're going to be spreading that HP damage out over more guys. But anyway, this is cool. I dig it. I think it's just like, if you have other things you want to use nature gems for, may not be the most efficient. Can be better to just use more sages. Okay, so we've kind of talked about what you're doing. There's a few things I want to add. So one of the things is we're late enough in the game where you can kind of expect he's going to be doing Army of Gold. If he does Army of Gold and you've got these guys with 14 damage spears trying to poke somebody with probably like 28 protection, this is what is called a slap fight. And y'all are going to be basically sitting there slapping each other, not doing any damage. And that's going to be basically the same for your crossbows. The difference is your crossbows are armor piercing damage, so when they hit, they'll probably actually do more damage than these guys will in the poke fight. So when you're in a slap fight, doing significantly more damage when you're slapping is going to make a lot of difference. So either it's going to come down to your mage support in a slap fight. So like if TNG brings better mage support, if y'all both have armies of gold up, then he's going to do better than you will. Or it comes to anti-slap fight buffing. And so we're going to talk real quick about anti-slap fight buffing. And basically what you want to do to get yourself out of it, to basically be winning this slap fight, is there's 2 key spells you want to be dropping. One of them is, and you could just have somebody join a communion, and then one of them is going to be where the hell are we? Strength of Giants. And the other one is Weapons of Sharpness. And if you can get this on a significant portion of your front line, they're going to be way, 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 way better. So Strength of Giants is going to get these guys up to, they're basically going to be doing 18 damage, which is way more than 14. Because once you factor in the protection reduction, it's a big difference. So just getting this up is a big deal, versus high protection opponents. But then Weapons of Sharpness is going to cut the enemy's defense in half. So like 14 piercing damage versus, let's say they had 25 defense, you're going to subtract 20% out, so like -5. So they're going to be like effectively 19 protection versus 14. So almost all the time you're not going to do any damage. But occasionally you'll get lucky and you'll do some. That's basically if you don't do a lot of the anti-slap fight scripting. If we do Strength of Giants, well, this is going to be 18 piercing damage, and you're still going to do the -20% from 25, so it'll be 19 protection. So the way that's going to work is a fair amount of the time you're not going to do damage, but a fair amount of the time too you're going to be doing like chip damage, like 1 or 2 or 3 damage. The problem is if they have Army of Gold plus Mass Regen up, then it's very possible that you're not going to be doing enough damage to make your way through their regen, right? So Strength of Giants is probably not going to be sufficient for really breaking you out of a true slap fight. What will break you out is if we get Weapons of Sharpness on these guys. Weapons of Sharpness, if we're 18 damage and Weapons of Sharpness, and they have 25 protection, first we'll do the reduction of the 20%, which gets us to 19, and then we cut that in half, and let's say that gets us to 10. Well, now we're doing basically, we've got an 18 damage versus 10 protection. And now we're going to be doing, between probably 8 and, 12 or 13 damage a hit. Which for humans, that means we potentially can be one hit killing them. So regen wouldn't matter and a bunch of that stuff. So Weapons of Sharpness is going to make a big difference in a slap fight, which I think is something that you may end up running into against TNG. So let's talk real quick about how to get that script set up. What you probably want to do, because you've got a lot of archers, I don't recommend mass flight. Whoops. Where's our commander who has this guy? So you'll have your guy with 80 leadership put these guys in a line, and then... Oh, wait, these are crossbowmen. Shit. The crossbowmen... Okay, let's do the formation real quick. These guys are just your raiders, so we're going to hide them somewhere else. These guys are not going to be in the battle. I mean, you may bring them in for siege chaff and stuff, but these are primarily raiders. Okay, here's your front line of hoplites. So these guys, you're going to have 2 squads of the Satyr Crossbowmen, and they're on fire or something. It depends what you're fighting. And then you're going to have a front line. These guys are on hold and attack because you want them to get buffed up by some Strength of Giants. And then you're going to have these guys kind of flush with this line. And these are the main guys who are going to get hit with Weapons of Sharpness. The thing is the line's really important for kind of preventing people from breaking through. And if you were really min-maxing it, you would split these guys up in groups, which we actually could probably do. You could do something like this. The main purpose of these guys is to prevent the enemy from flanking your archers. And the main purpose of the guys we put in the middle is to form a core that's going to punch through the enemy line. And to give us a good density when we're casting Weapons of Sharpness and a Strength of Giants, because it's really inefficient to cast those spells onto lines. So anyway, you put that here, and then you can either do it from your communion. So if you have 4 slaves, communion slaves, and you do summon Earth Power, then you will be up to 4, because you're going to have 2 from the communion, 1 from Earth Power. So to do it, Weapons of Sharpness, you actually need to be at 5. So you have several options to get there. You can give them 1 gem for each time you want to cast it. Or you can do Power the Spheres. Power the Spheres is kind of high fatigue, so it will tend to kind of put more of a burden on your communion if you do that. But it is totally an option. And if you do Power the Spheres on kind of one guy, you can have him spam out Weapons of Sharpness like 3 times, right? And 3 times would get a significant portion of probably both of these and these. It may also target your archers, which is kind of unfortunate, but you can't really do much. Yeah. If you put your archers on skirmish formation, it's going to make the spellcasting AI want to target them less. But what I would probably do is if you put them right on the line, you'd have to test and see exactly where you want them. I don't know if this might overlap a little too much, like you might want it here. It will probably do first target for the Weapons of Sharpness would probably be here. Like if you, let's say you had that guy, let's pretend this was him, the caster of Weapons of Sharpness. He was right here, and these guys are all on hold and attack, and these guys are on hold and fire. The first cast would go here. The second cast would probably target right here, because these guys are really high density, and these guys are low density. So it's probably going to get a section of the high density and the low density guys. Probably where it will target, and then if you do the same here with skirmish formation, it will probably try to do the same. But it may just drop it here in the middle. It's hard to say, because casting in here, while these are high density, it's also going to catch some of this shit area in front. But, you know, potentially, if you were like really min-maxing it, you could put like a small little square of guys right here, and that would get the Weapons of Sharpness AI to drop it right here. So you could do like a box here, a small box here, and a small box here. And that would hopefully draw, with these guys in skirmish formation and kind of nearby, hopefully that would basically cause the Weapons of Sharpness AI to target where you want it to. But yeah, because you've got really strong defensive dudes, but they can't really punch through hard to hit stuff, that is going to make a big old fat difference. So you can do that with your Communion. You can also do it with a Pan who has a Bloodstone, and he just does summon Earth Power, and he can drop it. So it's your choice, but yeah. Basically, everything a Pan can do, one of these guys can do in a Communion, but you're just not relying on the Communion. The only thing Pans can do is they can do some stuff like faster than these guys would be able to do. You know, like Earthquake, or if you want to cast Creeping Doom or something, which we're going to talk about right now, actually, because we've talked about how to get out of the slap fight problem, which is a problem you've got. The next thing we're going to talk about is one of the great Pangea cheese strategies. And before we get into that, I'm going to comment, or leading into it, you have finished Enchantment 8. And what that means is that you have the Enchantment 8. And what that means is you have this spell called Haunted Forest. And this is a spell that you can actually cast right now. If you want, if you had the gems, you could cast it immediately, because you've got some dude somewhere, this guy, who's Nature 3, Death 2. And what that means is if you put this Ring of Sorcery on him and a Thistle Mace, which you've got Thistle Maces lying around, you also have a Moonvine Bracelet, which you could use. So honestly, you can get up to Nature 6 right now with Death 2. So yeah, he could be dropping Haunted Forest. What Haunted Forest does is every living creature who dies, they're going to turn into a mannequin if they are in your Dominion, which is actually... Let me make sure I got that right. Yeah, in your Dominion only. So what that is going to do is anybody you kill, they'll turn into a mannequin, and then they will basically disrupt the enemy, drawing fire, so that your guys take fewer hits and you continue to kill more of them. It's a pretty good spell for army fights. But it's also somewhat abusable, and the main abuse is if you have... where is our favorite Pan? Okay, he's moving in. It's abusable because this guy can cast Creeping Doom. Creeping Doom as a spell gives you 70 plus bugs. And why that is important, you can also do Strength of Gaia Creeping Doom, which will give you just a tiny bit more bugs. And it's going to make this cost less fatigue. Yeah, it'll give you an additional 5 bugs, and then, but importantly, it's going to cut the fatigue in half. And that's only for, I think it's for 1 gem, which I don't have any gems to give him. But yeah, for 1 gem, you make 75 bugs, which is pretty nuts. And you may be like, okay, that's great. But if we have Creeping Doom up, I mean, not Creeping Doom, Haunted Forest, after each of these bugs die, they turn into a mannequin. And mannequins are pretty good at A, taking hits, but B, they have Sleeping Vines, which means against elite units, they actually are kind of okay if they outnumber them. If they put them to sleep. If there's some units it doesn't work on, I think if they're inanimate, the Sleeping Vines don't work. But against a lot of things, the Sleeping Vines are going to knock them out. And they're great chaff, and they can kind of do some damage too. So getting 75 mannequins for 1 nature gem is the shit. But they're bugs before they're mannequins, and the bugs are also useful. Now, what you can do is you put these guys, so like we've kind of got one second. Let me get these guys moving out. So when every time I click over here, it's not having them pop up. Okay, good. So they're not here. So what you can do, let's pretend this was my Creeping Doomcaster. Let's pretend this was a pan. Let's pretend this is another pan. You put them right here in the front, and ideally you put a little bit of armor on them so they don't get kind of randomly picked off by like an arrow or something standing out here in the front, like just the lion pelt would be good. Or when you do Strength of Gaia, it's going to get bark skin on them too. And regen. So especially if they do Strength of Gaia turn 1 and then they do Creeping Doom turn 2, they're going to pump out a crap ton of bugs. So if you have 3 of them, you can also do it with the Communion. I think I would probably prefer to do it with the Pan, but you can totally do it with the Nature Randoms and a Communion. And let's say you do 2 turns of pumping out bugs. If you do that, then on turn 2, you have 3 guys that spend 2 turns pumping out bugs. On turn 3, because you spent 1 turn doing Strength of Gaia, you will have 75 times 6 bugs, which is 150 times 3, which is about 450 bugs. Now, each of those bugs, when they get hit, if you're fighting in Friendly Dominion, will turn into a mannequin, which is kind of nuts. But if we time our army buffs, like if we time Aerofend to be not this turn, but we move it 1 out to the 3rd slot, and it's a little slower casting than Creeping Doom. I'm not totally sure how, Aerofend might not get all of them, but things like Army of Gold, if you put that in the 3rd slot, would get all of your bugs. So now they're 20 protection, which means a lot of times they're going to take 0 damage, so the fact they have 1 HP wouldn't matter. With Aerofend, they're going to be immune to your own Archer Fire, enemy Archer Fire. And then Will of Fates, which also affects them, they're going to be extremely hard to just get out of their bug form. And once you finally win and get them out of their bug form, then a mannequin pops up. Now, the mannequin will not have the buffs that the bug does. Thank God, or it would be just completely broken. But yeah, that is going to be a huge distraction, and what's kind of important is you want to get the bugs as much as you can, kind of in front of your army. Because you want them kind of soaking up the hits rather than your army, and then these guys will kind of punch through at the end. But that is pretty terrifying to fight against. It's especially good when you have a lot of ranged crossbowmen and mages to pummel stuff into the enemy army. So I think those are the two of the big things that I would say you want. The other thing is, as you put up Army of Gold, things like Mass Regen become very, very good. Any one of your pans, if we look at Mass Regen, it's Nature 4 with 2 gems, which means you can cast it as a Nature 3 with 3 gems. But what I would probably do, because it's something I would want to cast literally every fight, is I would give a pan, a Thistle Mace, and then I would give him a Cornucopia, which is kind of expensive, but then I just don't have to worry about it. I don't have to worry about gem baiting. I don't have to worry about anything. Every single fight, we're going to have Mass Regen up. And we can do it turn 1. Alternatively, you can ditch the Thistle Mace, keep the Cornucopia. You can do Strength of Gaia and then get it up turn 2. Also totally fine. So, and that would probably be more economical, but Cornucopia, and then just do Summon, Strength of Gaia, and then Mass Regen. And every fight, you've got it. And so that's really strong, especially when you're in slap fights. So I think that's what you want to have in. You definitely want to have that in every major army. Relief is another option, which is good in very, very long fights. The other thing to think about is, as you get in slap fights, mage support becomes more important. So, the Weapons of Sharpness business is going to help it not be a slap fight. But I don't know what TNG is going to bring against you. So, yeah, it may be that you need to bring kind of more mages. So these 4 guys, I expect that, especially with the Ring of Regen, they could probably support 8 masters pretty easily. The problem is that unless the masters are casting Astral, these guys are going to be taking high amounts of fatigue damage. Or, large amounts of fatigue, which will translate to HP damage. So I presume you've tested it more, but my intuition would be that you could probably get away with, a pretty good master to slave ratio, which you normally couldn't quite get away with because there's going to be a lot of off-path casting that's going to affect your slaves. But that would be important because basically in a slap, the mage support and evocation can actually be pretty damn important in a slap fight. Yeah. The other thing you want to think about is, especially like he's got a lot of these Masters of the Way, which are the nature plus random mages. And basically they're his little research monkeys. And they can all spam Frozen Heart. So one thing you definitely want to have, and Frozen Heart, if you look at it, is it's armor negating damage, but it's only 10, so it's not a ton, but it's cold damage. So if you basically, especially with like Dryad, with Satyrs and stuff, if you can get Frostfend up, which you have researched, it's going to go a long way to helping you against Frozen Heart spam, which I believe will be probably one of his important defensive tools. So what I would recommend is making a water lens. I don't know if you have any. You don't. So you make a water lens. They're super cheap, right? But they give you 1 temporary water gem. Put it on one of your water communion masters and just have them be communion master. And then to cast it, you need to be water 4, or you need to have 2 gems. So you can make the water bracelet too. You give him a water lens and a water bracelet. And then when he's communion master with 2 slaves, he'll be able to cast this for 1 gem. If you don't have the bracelet in time, you can just give him enough water. Like with 2 slaves, you can even move it out this turn and then do the Frostfend, like bring the gear later so you're not relying on the constant replenishment of water gems. But yeah, you don't need any gear. You can have one of your water guys cast this with 4 communion slaves just by giving him 2 water gems, if that makes sense. So yeah, that I think is a spell you're definitely going to want to have up against Tianqi. The other thing you can look to cast is sometimes Tianqi is going to have the little flaming guys as part of his army. It's a little hard, I think. Tianqi, I don't recall them getting a lot of fire access in the late age. Yeah, I don't think they do. Yeah, they don't. So this guy might get a tiny bit. No. So they have no fire access, but they still have the fire summon, which presumably they could get. So if you see that, then you would probably need to look at putting up like one of the fire. You don't have any fire mages really at all. You've got like 1. But you can still do it with water. In water, you can do Warriors of Niflheim. If you see him start doing things like flaming arrows, or he starts using the fire summons, I forget what they're called, a Demon of Heavenly Fires or something. Anyway, if he's using those, you probably want to get this up, which is not terribly hard for you to cast. Basically, you need a water lens and a water bracelet, and then you need to use 1 gem each time you cast it on one of your water communion masters. But all of the resistance stuff also gets way easier the second you get Enchantment 9, which I guess is the reason you went it, for Gaia's Blessing, which is really good for Pangea. So when you get that, pretty good. Okay, so we've talked about a fair amount of stuff, and we're getting to where we're pretty long in the episode. There's only a few things more that I want to cover. One of them is I want to talk a little bit about Charm. Charm is one of the great spells in Dominions. It's like Enslave Mind, but it's short range. So for this to work, you basically need your guy. The AI kind of likes casting it if you don't have terribly much else to cast, but you need to be in range. So generally, your Charm caster, you want it on advance and cast spells. How it's different than Enslave is it doesn't turn commanders into units, which means you get to keep their items, and you don't have to like Gift of Reason them, so it's pretty sweet. I dig it. But yeah, all your pans can cast it, and then you can do Strength of Gaia, and they can cast it on the cheap, because it's kind of high fatigue cost, but if you're Nature 4, you can cast it for like 15 fatigue, which is not bad. Especially if you've got, like, your pants can also do Summon Earth Power, and then you can put some Reinvigoration gear on them. They can just drop this all day long. You can put Eyes of the Void on them too, which is pretty reasonable to do. So yeah, if any of your pans, like, they're going to be doing buffs generally. If you have the income, you put Reinvigoration gear on them, like Boots of the Messenger, Girdle of Strength, or Girdle of Might, or whatever it's called. And then you probably put an Eye of the Void on them here. If you don't, maybe they'll have a Cornucopia or something else in this slot that you need. But anyway, if they've got nothing else to put, you can drop an Eye of the Void, and then when they go off script, if you have them on Advance and cast spells, they'll generally be casting Charm or what do you call it? What's the evocation thing that they drop? Yeah, Storm of Thorns. They'll be casting out a lot. You don't have it researched. I really don't like this that much. It's okay, but I'd rather have them drop Charm a lot of the time. Yeah, so that is that. So that's a reason to go for Thom 7. But then make sure you have the guys you want to cast it on Advance and cast spells afterwards. And I think that goes in general for all your Communion Masters. Like the air guys, less important they're in Advance and cast spells because Thunderstrike is pretty damn long range. The air stuff's pretty long range. Water, Frozen Heart is sort of long range, but not super long range. Water you could probably do to put, and honestly, all your Communion Masters really you could probably put on Advance and cast spells. But probably you don't want them really walking forward too early, so you wouldn't want them doing that maybe till like after the 5th turn. So make sure you fill their full 5 script out if you're going to put them on Advance and cast spells. Earth, yeah, you probably want that too. I don't know. I feel like for you, Advance and cast spells is probably better. Yeah. Okay, so we're done talking about army composition and army stuff. I think you did most everything right, just kind of like a few additional ideas to help you kind of close this game out. We'll talk about raiding. So you've got these guys set up to raid, which are basically the little stealthy satyrs who are running around with a stealth-boosted Dryad. Which, great. You can run around and raid. The thing is this is not terribly hard to counter if there's like a ton of things that would counter this. Yeah. So, like basic thugs would be able to kill kind of an unlimited number of satyrs. If they have poison resistance, they wouldn't really be affected by Swarm either. I'm not sure what TNT would particularly use, but anyway, if they knew this is what you're doing, it's kind of one-dimensional. And like you've got other squads which presumably are going to come out and they're basically the same, right? And you're just going to raid with a bunch of these. Which, first of all, great. Like this is a good thing to raid with. And you've got plans to, you've got the basics all working, right? Like you've got big armies rolling out. The armies, I assume you've got an army which is going to be gathering here, which is going to be doing basically the same thing. Army of Gold, Fog Warriors, all the important buffs coming out, right? And then you're going to roll and use these armies to take their infrastructure. And meanwhile, you're going to have the raiders causing panic and then also taking a bunch of the surrounding land, not really focusing on the infrastructure. Great. An improvement, though, is having different threat vectors for raiding, different intensities of raiding. And what that means is that it's very hard to counter, because like if you do something which is strong enough to counter these guys, but it's not strong enough to counter like threat level 2 raider, then instead of you, like every time they do a counter, instead of you losing a few hundred gold worth of units, they're going to lose a few hundred gold of units in addition to losing the raiding war, right? So it's like a double whammy for them. So like the worst thing when you're counter raiding is when your counter raiders die. And you're like, shit. Because not only now are you like losing the raiding war, you're losing additional kind of like invested gold. Now, how do we do this? There's a few things we're going to talk about, and there's a bunch of different options. One thing I'll just mention real quick is you have a fair amount of pearls, and then you have the Earth Astral Crosspath on your Pretender, so you can just do golem construction. Make a golem. Having a golem jump around and raid... So the golem can do a few things. One is it can raid itself. The second thing the golem can do is it can jump on top of their... it can jump on top of their raiders, right? So when they... Let's say you take something and then they take it back. Like, and what you can do, which is kind of funny, like, let's say you go raid this, right? Knock down this temple. You raid this with some Dryads or something. I mean, with your Satyrs. And it's like, okay, that's not too hard. You put like a lot of PD in it. So let's say you put like 30 or 40 PD, which would be a lot. They probably send like a small group to take it back. That group would die, right? Because they weren't expecting there to be so much PD there. And then they're like, okay, well, he just dropped a ton of PD. We're going to go send in a bunch of stuff to take it. Well, okay, they moved that army there, and now this army's stuck out in the open. You drop your golem on top of that army in the magic phase. They can't run. They just get wiped out, and they didn't even know. That can be like how you introduce your golem. Now, this would have to be something that was like vulnerable to golems, but a lot of times the things which are counter raiding are going to be vulnerable to golems. They're not going to be like, you know, an army or super duper mage supported. Now, if we look at TNC, though, TNC does have some things which, you know, we'd have to concern ourselves with when we use golems. And the main thing is, they've got... Oh my god, where are you? Here you go. They have air randoms here, and these air randoms can magic phase attack, the Ancestor Guides. And basically they can Cloud Trapeze onto you, and they can summon air elementals. And enough Cloud Trapezing air elementals would kill a golem. So, anyway, that's just the risk that you've got. And golems can't really retreat. So if you get caught and you're in trouble, one way around that is you do like a Shademail Hallberg, which your death random pants can make. And then you don't have to worry about that, because anytime you have a magic phase threat like this, that you can't block against, like, it's really hard to make a golem immune to air elementals, because they will trample him to death. And if they're size 6, you can't really stop it. And it's really hard to get a golem up to size 6, because I think they're size 4. Yeah. So, anyway, we're going to go pull up a test game. I'm going to show you some of the thugs. Okay, so I've got a test game pulled up here. And actually, I need to turn, I'd put Haunted Forest up, but I realize I kind of need to take it down. Because I want to show you a little bit what it does, but not right now. So I've got a few very budget fluffer thugging situations set up here. The first one is a stealthy one, and we are going to send them, I think, over here, because this is a little bit of a weaker enemy. So they should do okay. Basically, I've got 2 of these birds, which are not undisciplined, which is nice. And they're going to guard my Dryad. Hopefully they will sit in the same tile as her, and that way when she spits out protection, it'll land on first the Satyr Commanders here, and then it will land on her. And then I've just got 3 Satyr Commanders with Frostbrands. So in total, and you would really only want 1 Nature Gem on her, just so I don't have to micro it. I put a Cornucopia. So this is 5 gems. So basically, we've got 4 5-gem items, which is really, they're really 3-gem items because of hammers. So it's really like 12 gems worth of stuff. And I think we will see this is pretty effective. These guys are just on hold. They're all on the same tile. It's not going to work against everything, but for 12 gems, it's pretty damn cheap. And then these guys are pretty cheap. They're 40 gold. They're basically like indie commanders, except they're better and they're stealthy. But anyway, I think we will see that this works. And they've got a little better, oh, no, I thought they had hoof attack too. I guess they don't. But anyway, I think we'll see that works. So that is option 1. And these are not as good as some of the other things we'll be doing, but they're stealthy, which is nice. Option 2 is going to be, instead of using a Dryad, we're going to use this one. The reason we want to use Dryads and the other one is because Dryads are stealthy. These guys are not, but neither are our Centaur Commanders. So we'll stack up with better commanders, and with this guy, I just put a ton of gems so I don't need to worry about micro. Really only need 1 gem on him for the first Earth Power. After that, he can do the Iron Warriors. But basically, he's going to cast Iron Warriors on both of them. First on them, then on himself. And again, he has a bodyguard in case somebody makes it to the back or arrows come back. This guy will help catch things. The bodyguards are not... Sometimes they wiggle out of their square, in which case they won't get Iron Warriors cast on them. But, you know, what are we going to do? So anyway, this is option number 2. And then option number 3 for fluffing is a little bit silly, but we're going to move them down here. And basically, it's very similar to above. Oh, shit. That guy has disease. Okay, let's swap his gear out. Somebody else. Okay, wait, where did I put that gear? Here? Okay, and then give them 4. Okay, and so then these guys are going to come down here. Oh. Wait, did I mess this up? I did. Okay, you guys are coming down here. I should just have these guys now. Okay, good. So this is scripted right. These guys we've given an Amulet of Growth. So we've given them 2 5-gem items. So with hammers, it's 6 gems. The Amulet of Growth is going to help them trample heavy cav, which otherwise are kind of a problem if we run into those, which you never really know when you're raiding. We've given this guy a bodyguard. A lion pelt, so stray arrows at the beginning aren't going to kill him. And then if he does get surrounded, him and his little centaur buddy are probably going to hold off long enough for these guys to murder everybody else. I've given these guys a little, each a centaur, a satyr hoplite, and that is so that they will also get buffed up with the Iron Warriors. They'll be pretty tough. They may run, but whatever. They're going to improve our initial kind of raiding chances. And then finally, I've got a golem, which we will go send over here. They're Bloodhedge druids here, so they're going to be doing weird stuff, but I think the golem will be able to handle them. Body Ethereal, Astral Shield, Resist Magic, Hold, Attack Closest. Pretty standard golem script. You can do a bunch of different stuff on golems. Here we've got this, which I think is pretty good, but maybe a little on the expensive side for a golem kit. You can definitely get by with cheaper. Potentially I was thinking about putting on a little bit of reinvigoration just to get rid of the fatigue that builds up, but fatigue isn't that big of an issue on golems since of course they have 0 encumbrance. Anyway, this guy will probably murder all these, and generally you want the Starshine Skullcap on them so they can Cloud Trapeze, so that's what I've got just to show that off. The other thing we can do, and I don't think I'm going to, but you can take these guys and you can basically give them a Thug Kit, which oftentimes is just basic armor, basic hat, like Armor of Knights, some kind of hat like maybe the Dragon Helmet, a Frostbrand, and then a Vine Shield. So it's like 101 Thug Kit. You put them on them, they do Iron, Summon Earth Power, Iron Skin. If you give them a gem, they do Summon Earth Power. Honestly, they get by with Iron Skin without Summon Earth Power. You give them maybe a few reinvigoration items here. Body Ethereal, Astral Shield, Temper Flesh. That's a long script if you don't have reinvigoration items on them. If you put Summon Earth Power, it's easier to do a longer script with combination of having a reinvigoration item. But yeah, if you don't have a ton of reinvigoration, you probably want to limit it to like 3, like Iron Skin, Body Ethereal, and then Temper Flesh, and then have them chop in and Frostbrand people. And they work pretty damn well. But anyway, I think that's kind of simple. I was just going to show you some kind of unexpected stuff. And these are cheap. That's the emphasis on when you're thugging, is it needs to be very cheap. So we'll see how it does. I haven't tested this too much, but it should work. So here's the first one. This is the Centaur Army, 2-square Centaur Army. And everybody has appropriately been buffed up. See this guy getting back, and that's why we have the Centaur Guard. Okay. This was, I think, like 9 gems worth of items. Very efficient. And not a ton of golden troops. Okay, here we have the cruise missile approach with the enlarged Minotaurs. You can see one of them got body ethereal off script, which is another good thing to do. I probably could have done that on the Centaur squad too. We could have given them more hold commands and gotten them body ethereal. That probably would have been a good idea. Down here, this should be the Dryads. Or no, I'm sorry, the Satyrs and the Dryad. Don't embarrass me, boys. Okay, we missed one of the Harpies. So, like, if we look at the Harpies, this one got the protection buff, this one didn't. So, if there's Archer Fire, one of the Harpies is probably going to die. And then Swarm. And these guys run in with a little bit of cover from the bugs. And you can see they chop. This would be pretty heavy PD for them to run into too. Okay, we lost one. Part of that's because none of them were in the same square. I probably could have done like more holds, but I kind of wanted to time them running in with the bugs. So these guys are definitely the lightest, and then they also had a lighter buff because they didn't have Iron Warriors, they just had protection. But this would be like, you know, pretty heavy PD. Or kind of heavy. And a lot of times they'll take it without losing. This kind of just didn't go very well for them. And if you win like this, but you take a loss, you lost the Satyr Commander, which is like 40 gold, but I didn't even lose the Frostbrand. So, honestly, you just throw another Satyr Commander out there and give it to him. Not a big deal. And then finally we have the Golem, and I think we know how this is going to go. They're casting Blood Rain, which my Golem doesn't give a shit about. Anyway, the Golem just comes through and murders everybody. Now, what I just want to show with this, and you've also got your rating Stealthy Satyrs, so it's just, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it at different levels of threat, and they have different strengths and weaknesses. Like, the Golem can magic phase, and is probably the killiest of all of these, but he also has very particular weaknesses. And then you have these guys who are stealthy, but they're still going to be pretty damn good. If you put a gem on your Dryad too, you can enlarge the Satyrs, which is an option. And then you can put another gem on them, and they can usually get off another Swarm cast, which will keep them alive. So there's ways to kind of beef this squad up. But yeah, these are pretty efficient stealthy raiders. A lot of times you won't lose anything, but if you do, like I said, it's not a big deal. And then you have these guys, which is, like, this is probably one of the tougher squads. This and the Centaurs. Now, they're not stealthy, but they're pretty efficient in terms of the amount of gear you need to put on them versus what they can do. And they're not as vulnerable to things like remote assassination quite as much. Like, especially if you're just running away. Because you don't have a ton of gems or money invested in any single one of these. So it's very hard to kind of like gem efficiently kill them with that sort of stuff. Yeah. So anyway, those are a bunch of different thugging options. And I think if you use some of those, it will put basically a lot more rating pressure on the enemy. Now, we'll also get a pan real quick. And I'm going to put... We're going to go ahead and put Haunted Forest up. And I'm just going to show you what a pan can do with Haunted Forest. And this... actually, we're going to get 2 pans, because I do want to show you something. We're going to make... One second, I need Blood Slaves, too. Okay. This is in my Dominion. Okay, pan number 2, good. Now... Wait, whoops. Okay, pan number 1 is going to just have this thing. Pan number 2, I should have gone ahead and made him his stuff. He needs Boots of the Earth, or Earth Boots, and then a Bloodstone. Or he doesn't really, he really only needs Boots of the Earth. What am I talking about? Should give him 5 of these, and then we'll just give you... Honestly, he doesn't even need more. So let's watch these guys run into this throne. I bet I've stolen my Haunted Forest. Good. Okay, these guys versus throne. So here's what we're going to do. Now, you would probably want to do like lion pelts on them, but we're not doing that. Strength of Gaia. Creeping Doom times 2. Okay? And now this guy, we want to do basically, we can also do Strength of Gaia. Then we can do Summon Earth Power, and then we can do Army of Gold. That will make these guys kind of hard to kill. Okay. And this will just show you kind of what Haunted Forest does. Now you have to imagine these guys are here with an army. Like, these trolls just cannot get through that many. Anyway, they would have died a lot faster if they weren't regening, because, I mean, the bugs aren't super killy, but anyway, and we charmed a bunch of them. So, shows 2 things, coolness of charm, and then also the coolness of Creeping Doom. Now, we could have thrown that into something much bigger. I don't know if there's anything around here I could kind of throw that little combo into, but anyway, that is some kind of cool stuff that we can do up in here. I think we're going to kind of do final thoughts as I pull up your game again. Okay. And I realized as I was pulling this off, there's a few things I didn't cover, so we'll kind of talk about them and then we'll do final thoughts. Site searching. No fire. You do have like 1 or 2 fire mages. It's going to be really hard for you to get fire off the ground, I think, before the game ends. But what can you do? You got a fair amount of fire gems built up. I assume you're going to go for flame spirits. Going to be a little tricky to cast, because you've got a fire 1, but you're making the fire death booster with this guy. From that, you can cast augury, but I don't think you really want to use that guy for the this guy for that. If you make a ring of wizardry later, you can do it. I don't really see an easy way for you to get to fire 3 at the moment, aside from like a ring of wizardry or somehow getting to where... I don't see an obvious way to get Staff of Elemental Mastery either. So, not totally sure how you're going to get up to fire 3, but at fire 2, the thing is, until you get to fire 3, you can't really scale. Like, you can't get a lot of fire mages out, so not totally sure what I would do with, as you. Super late to start, just with the game state as it is, to start fireside searching. Potentially you have this guy come with like one of your final armies to do flaming arrows, but I don't really like that, honestly. I'm not really sure what I would do. But yeah, so you haven't done fire. The other one you haven't done is death. Now, death is the one you can do. Your death income sucks, though. It's only 1. You actually have better fire income. How do you deal with that? Okay, so you're making a skull staff. I'm not sure what your plans are for death. The thing is, like, making a skull staff, yeah. I don't know what you're going to do with it. Honestly, you need those gems for site searching. And the best way you're going to site search is with Dark Knowledge. So, death is important to have in the late game. If the things you were going to do... The hell? How are you making it? Oh, he was making the booster, okay. Where did I see a skull staff? Oh, it's not a skull staff, it's a skull of fire, yeah. Your options are alchemize to get some death gems to start site searching. That is worth it if you know you're going to find a site. And when I was looking around, I found some disease guys like here. You probably, I don't know where all they came from, but if you see people getting diseased, you know there's probably a death site there. So you want to go ahead and like dark knowledge this place right away. I don't know if there's other spots where they may be diseased. I thought I saw one more as I was kind of browsing around. But possibly I didn't. Anyway, definitely site search this for death. Then I would probably try to get all your swamp site search for death first. After that, and then I would get your forests, and then if you have any mountains, I would do those. So like this one would be, I'd probably do swamps, and then this. And these ones are high enough value, like there's enough death gems that typically come out of these places, like a thrown forest, and then swamps. It's probably worth alchemizing pearls to go ahead and do that right away. Everything else, I would probably try to rely on native death growth for Dark Knowledge Ink. But that's really like you're playing for if the game goes later. Because you don't want to be in a late game with no death income. If we look at everything else, you've done a pretty good job site searching like air and water and earth. You've done really good. Astral, really good. Death, yeah, we got some work to do. You haven't really done much holy. And I don't know how many priests you have around. But like if you have a site like this one that you haven't site search holy in, it's usually worth it to take a holy one, even if it's a mage, and waste one mage turn to do it. In your whole empire, you're about like 30 provinces. You'll probably find about two ancient temples, maybe 3, and maybe 4. So between 1 and 4, probably averaging around 2 holy temples. And each one of so that's going to give you 1 pearl a turn. And if I had to spend, a few mage turns to get that, I would totally do that for 2 or 3 pearls a turn. So that's one thing to do. You haven't site search holy. Fire, I think you're a little just bit out of the game on fire. But death, I think you have a chance to break into that by the late game. So that's kind of the hedge. We haven't really talked about recruitment. You've got a shit ton of sages, which is good. Sages are awesome. You've got enough, I think, to do most of the things you're going to need to do in your army. You've got a fair amount of pans up here, but you don't, I don't think, have a lot of pans down here. You have like a few here, a couple here, a couple here. Actually, you've got a fair amount. You've actually got a fair amount of pans. You might need a couple more, but I think like you get the thumbs up in the pan department. And you remember pans are going to be doing any of our earth buffs, like getting us out of slap fights, and then they're also going to be doing creeping doom shenanigans. What you do not have a lot of, though you have a few of, is dryads. And if you think about it, dryads are not great at researching. They're not as good in your armies as the sages, but they're very good assassins. And what you're going to be getting into, so as you attack Tianqi, I think you're going to crush them, by the way. So as you crush Tianqi, then basically, once you get close to this throne, everybody should turn on you if they're intelligent players. I would turn on you if I were one of your neighbors. So, you don't really need to kill anybody else except take this one throne from Satis. So then the question is like, how do you defend yourself? And oh, wait, you're playing Pan, who's one of the best at defending themselves. So there's a few things I would be prepared for as the game gets to this state. So you probably have like 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 turns killing Tianqi before the world turns on you. But as you get this throne, everybody's going to turn on you. Now, once it turns on you, you don't want anybody to take your infrastructure, and you want to win the raiding war against them, right? That's how I would think about it, and that's what I would be preparing for as this comes. So I would plan on having at least one big army in each corner of your empire where you can take a fight if you want to. And I would have at least 10 dryads near every kind of like within 1 move of every fort. So like these, if you can't get here in 1 move, I would try to have like almost 10 in each. These are next to each other, so 10 here. These are next to each other. And in fact, like if you have 10 here, I think they might be able to move up from here to here. We can check actually. Yeah, they can move here. So, but I don't think if you have a dryad, I don't think they can, oh, they can move here too. So if you have 10 in this fort, then in 1 turn, you can defend any of these forts. So that's good. And then I would have 10 up here and then 10 here. Now, for each of those, you would want like some gear. Once you have, this is the other thing about Haunted Forest, is Haunted Forest turns Dryad assassinations with Swarm into just unfair like abominations. because each of those bugs you get from Swarm is going to turn into a mannequin, and mannequins are actually pretty damn good in assassinations because of the sleep thing. So yeah, it is scary with Dryads and Haunted Forests. Now that gets us to, do you need items for them? Do you need water bottles for Dryads and Haunted Forest? The short answer is no. Handful of acorns are nice because it's nice to have some kind of retinue that is going to prevent somebody from just bum rushing you before you get your first swarm off. Which is unlikely, but possible. Coral swords are nice, give you a little bit extra HP, or things which are going to give you lucky are kind of nice, like the mistletoe garland. So those are all kind of like luxury items though. So, the lion pelts are good. So I think you have, luxury items you can make. The water bottles are fine. You can make some of those for your harder things. You've already got a fair amount of water bottles. But really, you probably need, one way to look at this is like, how many groups of 10 Dryads can I have turned on at a time? And you need to be able to have one group. So at a minimum, you want one which I think you already have. Like, you've got a fair amount of handful of acorns. You've got a fair amount of water bottles running around. You have enough to have 10 Dryads with at least one retinue unit, and then you could give them some nature gems, and they would be able to do their thing. Now, why do I say 10? It's because you need a critical mass. The usual kind of number I like to think about, it's like if you take an army, like this army, you wouldn't need 10. They only have 3 commanders, right? So this one, honestly, you would just murder with 10. But like if we were looking at this big Abyssia battle, oh no, this wasn't it. This side had like 25, 30 mages, and then this side had like 20 mages. So if you have 10, let's say they move this army on top of your fort. Well, you assassinate 10, which is going to cripple their attack if they try to like jump inside and storm it, right? So then the storm would probably fail if you have any kind of army on top. And then they're going to have some people retreat outside. So basically, if you kill half the mages, you'll probably cripple their attack. But then in addition, like, they're going to have to move, like if they want to rescue the troops that are on top, they're going to have to move at least that many mages in to get it out. Like if you only had 3, they could move like 6 commanders in and then probably get the army out the next turn, or at least some of the army. But yeah, basically assassins are one of the things that work better in larger numbers, is what I'm trying to say. So you don't want to slowly pick off like this many commanders one at a time. You want to kill like half of them, right? Or more than half. Like ideally you kill all of them, but that may be far reaching. So I think you're probably checked out. Like every time I look anywhere around the map, you've got a ton of sages that you've been using for researching, but you don't really need to do a lot of researching anymore. So they can now be used in the army. You've got a pretty good number of pans. Potentially you could use a few more. I think the thing that you're really missing are Dryads. Particularly, you are going to want Dryads down here, like all along this front, because you're going to have a lot of military that you're using to attack Tianqi. You're probably also going to want Dryads here, because like Marignon's going to push up this way. So like here and here, you're going to probably want like a real emphasis all here on like plenty and plenty of Dryads. So I'd switch all recruitment to Dryads for a while until they're coming out of your freaking ears, and try to get, like they don't need both, but like a handful of acorns, which we'll talk about your nature gems, because we kind of want to save those for Haunted Forest, but, or bottle of water, or even like, oh, we don't have death gems, so we can't do that, but yeah, some kind of retinue unit. Yeah. So having those here, being prepared to just be on the defensive, and then up here, you're going to be getting your next army ready to go after this throne from Satis when the time comes. And that time is going to be basically as soon as you've secured, basically as soon as people start warring you, after you take this throne, you want to be ready to attack. You may not go right away, but as soon as that happens, you're going to want to go. And when I say warring, as soon as you see massive troop buildups on your border, whether they've declared war or not, it's probably about time to go make your move on Satis. Yeah. And the idea is up basically here on the top part of your empire, you're going to be fighting an offensive war where you're going to be moving major armies out, trying to take stuff. On the bottom part of your empire, you're going to be fighting a defensive war. And what that means is you're only going to be using your armies when you're taking like very advantageous fights. Like if you're planning on assassinating a bunch of people the turn before, or like that turn, so you assassinate and then you attack, that would be a very advantageous fight. The other way to do a very advantageous fight is like, you know, you think the enemy's going to raid here and you move your army out or something like that. But primarily, if they try to take any of your infrastructure, you're going to assassinate the living shit out of them. So having a ton of Dryads is going to be the key to that, as well as having Haunted Forest up. The other thing you can do is with any of your nature mages, if they're going to come like raid on top of your fort, you can have them do, like, especially your Pans, they could just do Creeping Doom and retreat, which is a pretty low commitment way to significantly make your PD better. And it's only going to cost 1 gem. Like, they just do turn 1, 1 Creeping Doom, and then they run. And very few things are going to kind of pick them. I mean, like, potentially like Mass Flight or something could pick them off in the back, but you're probably pretty safe. The other thing is, as these guys declare war, well, that gives you more stuff that you can raid. So on this area, yeah, you're going to have some army. You want to have like armies down here that can kind of go do stuff, but you also just want to be ready to have like any of the raiding squads I was talking about above, which mostly it's making kits. Like, and a lot of that is Frostbrands. So getting some Frostbrands cranked out, we already have a fair amount. And then kind of just go ahead and kind of like pre-organize and make sure you have little, enough commanders. And either you're going to do the stealthy satyrs or some of the Cataphract commanders, and just get your little raiding squads ready to come out and try to win the raiding war as people kind of attack you. And as you put raiding pressure, it's going to prevent them from just deathballing into you. It's going to make them want to split their armies up, which is all going to just kind of diffuse the general effect of them attacking you. So yeah, I think you're in a super good position to win. You've got 3 thrones. I think you're in a very good diplomatic position. Just come down here, win against TNG. We talked about a few tips and tricks for the armies. And then we talked about how to improve the rating. I think a golem will help you immediately in the war with TNG. You'll probably find some things you can pick off. I would make that ASAP. And then we talked about Haunted Forest and the shenanigans you can do with that. The one thing I'll just add to that is Haunted Forest is a defensive tool. It's only going to work in your Dominion, so it's not going to help you in your war with TNG. So potentially, I think you were casting Fairy Court. Look, everything you can do with a fairy, you can basically do with your communions, because you just have the air randoms. It's only when like turn 1 really matters, and I don't really know who like turn 1's going to matter a ton against. Because like you don't really want to be doing Mass Flight yourself, I don't think. I mean, Mass Flight could be cool on top of Creeping Doom, but then you don't really want to do it turn 1, right? You can still do it with your communion later. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't really think you need Fairy Court. So save the nature gems. You don't need to cast. The timing for Haunted Forest is not necessarily right now. You really can wait. So do Haunted Forest like as you start getting close to taking this throne. You can probably do a pretty nice overcast. I would probably prepare for it, like, I don't know, 200 or something. It's not going to take you that long to get there. In like 10 turns, you'll have 200, right? And probably in like 8 turns is when you'll need to be casting it, plus this. So yeah, you'll be right at 200 in like 8 turns. And you'll be making some other stuff, so, as you make stuff and spend some of these, it might be closer to like 10. But that would be a really good time to put Haunted Forest up, because that's going to be when people are attacking you because you've eaten TNG. And that is when Haunted Forest is going to shine, because you will love to take wars and combats in your Dominion with Haunted Forest up, and you are going to even more love to assassinate people with Dryads in there. So, yeah, I honestly, man, I think it's going to be tricky to lose at this point. Yeah, I think you've got a pretty good setup. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed watching this. I think I talked a little bit at the beginning about how if you want me to do this, it's like $30. It takes me about 5 hours to do one of these, so I don't really mind asking for $30. This one I just did kind of for free for a random Patreon. We had people volunteer their nations, and then I just picked one at random. And I'm really happy I got to do it for this for this Pan player. But yeah, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed and learned something, and maybe you even want to play Pan in your next game. Take care.